Welcome to the ICU podcast, where we explore the vestibular experience through conversations between patients and the health professionals who care for them.
During this podcast, we invite patients to share their stories and healthcare professionals to ask questions so they are equipped to better care for and truly see the invisible challenges faced by their patients. I'm Kimberly Warner.
And I'm Cynthia Ryan, and we are your hosts on this journey of discovery.
Welcome, everyone, to the ICU podcast. This is a really important episode we have for you today. We're going to dive into how having a vestibular disorder affects our personal relationships. And we all know that they do. We know that it can be hard to relate to another person's experience. This is especially true for people struggling with vestibular impairment because A, it's invisible. B, sometimes the symptoms come and go. And C, it's really difficult to explain what it feels like. Above all, we want understanding, compassion, empathy from our loved ones. But instead, we often feel isolated. Vestibular disorders affect not only the people who are afflicted, but their families as well. And part of our recovery process involves learning how to educate others about our experience and communicate our needs. So today we have two fabulous guests. I'm going to introduce our first guest, Joy Mohr. Some of you may know her from Life Rebalance Chronicles. Actually, her episode hasn't come out yet, so never mind. She will be coming out this year. Joy's nightmare began March 2018 after a family vacation on a cruise ship. After a week of being home, she knew something was wrong when her land legs didn't return and she was beyond exhausted. As a healthcare provider herself, she researched the possibilities and started making appointments with ENTs, neurologists. She had a list of working diagnoses for over a year and saw many specialists before she was able to get definitive answers. She was finally diagnosed with MdDS. During the first year, increasing stress led to vestibular migraines, tinnitus, hyperacusis. Her MdDS symptoms now wax and wane, and on any given day, she falls somewhere on the MdDS PPPD loop, depending on the weather and personal activities. Welcome, Joy. We're so happy to have you here with us.
Thank you.
And I would like to introduce Jennifer or Jen Warner, who is a clinical social worker and psychotherapist with advanced training and certification in trauma-informed care, as well as holistic health and nutrition. She currently specializes in working with individuals living with traumatic stress-related complex chronic illness, including but not limited to vestibular disorders, migraine, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and dysautonomia or POTS. As a person who also lives with these conditions, Jen is committed to growing understanding of chronic illness as a trauma and the need for implementing trauma-informed care within organizations that serve this population and their caregivers. Jen is licensed in Illinois, Washington, Oregon, and New York State, and currently lives in Chicago with her wife, where she maintains a private psychotherapy and consulting practice and continues to see clients remotely across the United States. What an amazing resource for vestibular patients. Jen, welcome.
Thank you.
Oh, man. And by the way, Jen has an incredible Instagram channel. I'm just going to plug it. I freaking love your videos. They are so fun, but so informative too. They're such an incredible resource. So, what's the handle? Because people are going to ask, what's the handle?
That's incredibly sweet. It's Jen Wellness Therapy. Jen Wellness Therapy.
Yeah,
on
awesome.
Instagram.
And we're not related, unfortunately.
I know. But it is a great name, isn't it?
It is a good name. Warner Brothers. We could be the Warner sisters. Okay. So actually, I'm going to direct my first question. Joy, let's just, like we always do, let's start off getting a little bit of your patient experience, your vestibular journey, so that we can lay the groundwork for what we're about to talk with family and friends and involving them and educating them on this journey?
Sure. So the beginning was incredibly rough. Like high seas on a raft, stranded all alone, isolated, just rough. Fast forward 5 years through lots of ups and downs, kind of a roller coaster ride. I'm finally in a better position or a better place, feeling a lot better overall. So I feel like I'm closer to my old self or my new old self. Relationships definitely in the beginning were strained. I'm divorced now. In the beginning, I was still married. But communication was a huge component for why we ended up getting divorced. And a lot of family and friends, family especially, didn't understand why can't I talk on the phone for long hours or whenever they call. Or if two people would be talking to me from a car phone with the radio playing, and why could I not handle that? That was a really hard thing to educate family and friends on. Now I'm doing a lot better. Relationships are better. My ex-husband and I co-parent well with our two boys. I definitely have lost relationships through this journey. Some I have had to like disconnect from, knowing that they just didn't serve my nervous system the right way. I know myself so much better going through this journey, learning about it, studying, and realizing like I don't need a big circle. I need solid, good people that can bring meaning to my life. So,
Wow.
It's been an incredible journey.
Wow. I love what you just said about how certain people didn't serve your nervous system. I mean, we can circle back on that, but that's pretty, yeah, that's an incredible place to come to finally know yourself well enough to know who is serving your nervous system and what that actually means.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. To be aware of that and to accept that that's okay to let go
yeah.
of those relationships. And, I'll share, we're coming at this, we all have an interesting, we all play a different role in this kind of relationship, Joy, actually all three of you, Jen, Joy, Kimberly, you're all patients in some way. And I, besides being, the executive director of VITA, my mother has several vestibular problems, so I am a family member. And even before working with VITA, I had the experience of growing up with a mother who has Meniere's disease and PPPD and vestibular migraine. And I know that when I was a teenager and seeing her going through even the attacks were obvious. When she had a vertigo attack, that was obvious, and we could all have have empathy for her. But the in-betweens were invisible to us. We didn't know. We couldn't relate to how she was struggling in between. And then I started working for VITA, and I started talking to vestibular patients, and we were just like, oh, that's a mom, and then I started talking to other vestibular patients, and I heard my mother's story over and over. And it became real, much, much more real to me. Yeah, I have lots of other thoughts about that, but I want to jump in here and ask you, Jen. So, as I said, in addition to being a therapist, Jen, you also struggle with several invisible illnesses. How does that inform how you approach your clinical work, how you work with people to help them who have invisible illness, to help them through their journey?
That's such a great question. And it was, really intentional that I chose to direct my practice towards complex chronic illness. This is my second career. Prior to doing this, I was a documentary television producer and filmmaker. And so when I decided to become a clinical social worker, right after that, my work really took me into interpersonal violence and trauma related to that. But as I was diagnosed with kind of one after another of these unusual complex conditions, it was like what I kept coming up against, and this was more than 15 years ago, was doctors sending me for so many tests and not knowing anything, and friends being confused. And it was like, I've never heard of Ehlers-Danlos, or I've never heard, what does the word vestibular mean? There were so many questions, and I just found myself answering these things. And either people saying to me, oh, but you look okay. I mean, all the standard things that are said to people with invisible illness. And I realized how, after meeting a number of people and myself going through it, how actually traumatizing that can be over time. Because, you find yourself in this sort of Alice in Wonderland world of what's real, what's not. You know what you're going through, but for some reason, nobody else can see it. I like to reference Snuffleupagus from Sesame Street. When many of us were young, and unfortunately, nobody in their 20s knows what I'm talking about, but when I was young, and maybe when you were young, that Snuffleupagus couldn't be seen by anybody but Big Bird. I don't know if anyone remembers that.
Yeah.
But it was like ridiculous. Snuffleupagus would be there, and then he'd leave, and everyone would show up, and Big Bird would say, oh, you just missed Snuffy. And they'd all be like, there's no Snuffleupagus. That now, thankfully, some child psychologists stepped in with Sesame Street and said, this is very harmful to children. Let's have everybody see Snuffy. I think that's what the experience was like. It's like, what you're going through, but no one else can see it, and no one else is validating it. And so it was just so important to me that I know what that's like personally, but then being able to bring that into my practice so I can say to any client, Joy, when you were just telling your story, I can totally relate to that. Where it's like, suddenly you're on a lovely cruise, and the next minute you get off and it's like, oh, what's happened to me? And no one can understand that, and the changes, particularly with vestibular disorders that affect your entire life. So, long answer to a short question, but
you totally changed my relationship to Snuffleupagus, who I adored as a child.
Right.
I love that you come from your experience, Jen, is coming from a cellular knowing. That to me, is when it comes to invisible illness, I feel like it's almost essential to seek out a therapist that gets that, because it's too hard to academically understand it otherwise. It really, really is. And I'm, Joy, I'm remembering in our interview for LRC, you worked for a hospital that looked at you, and I'll let you finish the story because it's horrific, but what did they say to you?
They told me that I looked fine. I looked normal. They didn't believe my diagnosis. They thought I made up Malday debarkment syndrome diagnosis. Ultimately, I was fired because they did not believe that I had a true diagnosis.
Yeah.
Even though there's, ICD 9 and now 10 codes, and decades of research. It was ridiculous, but yeah.
It's maddening.
Yeah.
So that's obviously one of the challenges you really face, which was just the invisibility of it. Can you talk, Joy, about some of the other challenges in your relationships that you faced because of your disorder?
So, like talking on the phone or making plans, whether it would be going to a kid's event, like a sporting event or a music event, or doing something with friends or even something with family. There were so many times that by the time that event would start, which would normally be evening hours, I was exhausted. my brain was just done. The input from that day had zapped me, and I was extremely exhausted, couldn't take another sensory component, and had to bail or had to call and say I can't do whatever it is that is planned, or tell my children I'm not going to be able to go to your concert or your sporting event, and ask other parents, will you please take pictures for me so I have a memory to look back on that I wasn't there for. um it was very isolating and depressing, and it just kind of pushed me into this deep dark ravine, of sadness, loss. Slowly I just like lost my career, my marriage, my community, my coworkers, and then had to sell my home, because I couldn't take care of it. I was so exhausted and going up and down steps and just doing all of the day-to-day things that you need to do to maintain a home was exhausting. It was sad and lonely and isolating, and I don't know how else to describe it, I guess.
That's really hard. And, something that comes to mind when you describe that and from some personal experience of mine, is that even well-meaning friends and family members, they want to understand, but they can't, when if they haven't experienced it. And I have, my mother, who I mentioned has several vestibular problems. She lives with one of my brothers and his wife, and I was visiting one time, and you have a visitor, you want to go do things, and they're like, oh, let's go to this. It was a crystals museum or something like that. Let's go to this crystals show. And my mom's like, oh no, I've been there before. It's too overwhelming for me, this environment. And they're like, oh no, we'll just be there for a little while. It won't be a big deal. And so we went, and I don't have a diagnosable vestibular disorder, but I do have motion issues. And I had just gotten off a plane, so I'd just been traveling. And so here we are in this setting with a lot of people, a lot of noise, a lot of lights, because I had these lights shining on these crystals. And my mom very quickly became overwhelmed and could not. She's like, I have to sit down. And I was feeling the same way. I just became overwhelmed. I had this, this sense of sensory overload. And so in that moment, I could empathize with what she was going through. But most people would just be like, can't you just walk through? Can't you just, deal with it? And so, even people who they want to understand, but it's hard to understand when they're not in that place. And Jen, from your clinical work, you've probably worked with lots of people on their relationships. What's kind of a theme that you see in terms of the challenges that people have in relationship in communicating about their chronic illness?
Well, I think Joy, and I really want to acknowledge how beautifully you stated this, Joy, the grief, the loss, the grief. I mean, these are like deaths. They're a loss of everything you've ever known. I mean, or that is important to you. So not only are you now unfamiliar with how your body is functioning, but you are losing people that you love because they don't understand. You're losing jobs, you're losing your home, you're losing connections because of something that is impossible to, it is so hard to articulate to people what's happening in these situations. So I think grief is a unifying theme here. And that I use that word really intentionally, because we tend to think of grief as like, who died? But it's like, oh, who died? Everything died. Everything in my life has died. I'm here on earth, but I feel like I've died. My life is gone. And that's not hyperbole. And I think that many people, I mean, I myself have felt that way too, but many of the people who come and see me really feel that. And, you know, because it's like, as Joyce said, suddenly in almost the blink of an eye, you've lost everything you knew.
Yeah.
Yep.
How do you articulate that to the world? You know, so
Yes.
I would say that that's a unifying theme, but I think I may have gotten off of your question, Cynthia.
No, I think
that's perfect.
Just amazing to be able to provide that space for people, because, you know, I grew up with a psychological mother, but when I was going through this, of course, I wasn't thinking who died and that I should be grieving. I knew I felt miserable, but I didn't know why. And so for you to finally name it for a patient and say, this is grief, and then to give them that space to breathe is probably like, oh, the first tiny step towards allowing that experience to be part of your new self, your new identity. I don't know. Do you experience that, Jen, where people feel like a little bit relief almost to go, I'm grieving. I get this now.
Yeah. And yes. And I would say that, you know, to that same point, you know, when we think of post-traumatic stress, right? Everyone's generally familiar with that, but the word post means that the trauma itself is over and that you have a distance from it. In the case of our disorders, for instance, with vestibular disorders, so many of these other conditions, it's not over. It probably will never be over. So what you are in is in a state of enduring traumatic stress. There's a psychologist at Columbia, Donald Edmondson, who coined that term, enduring traumatic stress. And so you don't actually end up with the privilege of grieving and moving forward as if it's like, well, that chapter is done, because you're living with it. So it's like, I'm both grieving and having to coexist with my grief, because every day may bring something new. There could be some relief, or there could be something that feels like a new loss. So it is a really delicate balance, which is, you know, where therapy of this type, or trauma therapy in particular, can be a beautiful space to hold this. And because it's ongoing, you know. Yeah. And I think that, you know, we with grief, we have the privilege of having a point of, you know, acceptance and sort of the original, you know, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross way of thinking about it, and that it's done. Yeah. But what do you do when you're grieving maybe every day?
Enduring traumatic stress. Is that what you coined it?
No. Okay. And so that's the framework from which I work. Dr. Edmondson was referring to cardiac health, but I like to apply it to this work. So
I definitely think it applies. I haven't heard that term. I like that term. And it's something that I feel like I could use with my patients too.
Yeah. Yeah, it provides a context that an understanding that is so necessary, because otherwise we are thinking trauma and we have to somehow get over this. But tomorrow morning we're going to wake up with the same feeling. Right. And it might have the same anxiety. It might have this, I mean, all of that is still very alive.
Exactly. And just so you enjoy, you said this, and Cynthia, you said this too, about how with vestibular disorders, there are layers. It could be mal de département, which is a diagnosis that was applied to me at one point. Cynthia, you said your mom has Meniere's, PPPD, and vestibular migraine. And it's like, so what is it today? How is the loss going to be experienced today? What's going to come up today? What else might I be losing today, even though I may have gained a new diagnosis? It really turns this word grief on its head.
Yeah. You know, I'm remembering now, you might have an interesting insight about this, Jen. One of my early psychotherapeutic interventions was brain spotting, because and that's, a type of EMDR. So it was working with the trauma. And for me, it was the trauma of the initial bicycle accident where I flipped through the air. And the theory was that somehow my brain got stuck in the flip. And that's why I was always dizzy. And so the brain spotting was always bringing me back to that initial trauma, hoping that somehow it was going to resolve it. And then I'd walk out not dizzy anymore. And then, oh my God, I spent thousands of dollars on brain spotting and I was just as dizzy as I was at the end as I was. And it was never addressing the fact that I was dizzy in the moment, and walking out with the dizziness and then waking up with it. It was, like you said, it wasn't addressing the enduring aspect of it. So
one of the things that I kind of connected with when you were talking about that was the fact that, there's the physical part of recovery, whatever you're recovering from. And I don't know about anyone else, but I am the type of person who feels like I have to push through it. I have to I have to be working on it all the time so that I get better. And it's this linear thing about pushing through it to get better. And there's no just being in it. And when you're dealing with, your feelings, your emotional trauma, it's the same thing. You feel like you have to push through it to get better so you don't have these feelings. And so that concept of, as everyone has mentioned here, creating the space to be with your grief is such a relief and a release. And I can picture when I similarly had an accident that I went through counseling to deal with the trauma of it. And that moment where I realized I could just be in it and feel and forgive myself and just be with the emotions and let that be okay, was just this aha moment, this big relief.
Yeah. Well, and I imagine some of the pushing through it is because, going back to our relationships topic, which I totally forgot we were on that topic. But we do it for others. We want to get better because we feel like crap, but we also want to get through it in a speedy way so that we're not creating suffering for all the people in our lives too. So, Joy, that's going back to relationships. We talked a lot about the challenges in your relationships. What are some positive things that came out of your relationships through this?
So I don't have all the relationships that I had going into the cruise, into this vestibular journey, but the relationships that I have now, some of them are the same old relationships, but then new relationships. And I'd say that they're much more meaningful. And they don't have to have an understanding of my conditions, or that any given day I could be having a bad day. But I feel like the people that are still in my life, or the new people in my life, hold that space for me and don't judge me. Don't criticize me for having a bad day or having a vestibular flare up of some sort. Going back, there is an anxiety with it of, will I wake up with a migraine? Will I wake up and my ears are ringing so loudly that I feel like a NASCAR engine is next to my head? So it's brought me more peace by having people that are understanding, not necessarily understanding of what I'm physically going through, but just hold the space. Like, that's okay. You do you today, rest, and we'll get together another time. Versus the beginning, when I was made to feel guilty by some people, and I don't think it was all intentional, but some of the wording made it feel intentional. So just overall, more meaningful relationships. I'm trying to cultivate more understanding with my children of others, not as judgmental. It's so easy to be judgmental of other people, and nobody ever knows what is all going on in that person's life. Is there something physical, mental, emotional? There could be so many things going on. So just having some non-judgmental sympathy, empathy, caring, for other people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then with my patients, I allow them some time if they're going through something that's tough, or if they have a rare condition or an illness that not many people understand, or that me as a healthcare provider may not even understand. Just giving them some space to vent that out, get whatever they need out, and letting them know, even if I don't completely understand what they're going through, I can hold space for them and listen to them. So
It is interesting how, we go through life and we have relationships with people, and it's sometimes not until something dramatic happens that we get to see the positive or negative effect that has on the people we have relationships with. And sometimes it is the opportunity for someone to shine by showing their empathy. Whether that's a spouse or a child, and that can be really a beautiful thing. Yeah. Hey, Jen, I know that you, in your therapy, you use a multi-pronged holistic approach. Can you talk about that and what that means, and how that helps people? I don't want to say get better faster, but just uh, in their overall achieve their overall goals, wellness goals.
Yeah, no, of course. The gold standard, in quotes, models for working with complex chronic conditions or working with vestibular disorders fall under the cognitive behavioral therapy umbrella, and that includes ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy. I utilize cognitive behavioral therapy and I combine it with somatic experiencing work and mindfulness work. Somatics is such a huge part of the work that I do, but I like to also have something that's going to work with the mind. So as I explain it to my clients, it's like you have, your mind and your body are in a relationship, and they always have been. But when complex chronic illness starts to kick in, you have a relationship that's really going south. And often it's the mind that wants out of the marriage.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't the body that necessarily wants to get divorced. The mind really does. So the mind tends to send lots and lots and lots of messaging. And that, there is cognitive behavioral work that can be done with that. The body is going through something that can't be thought through, right? The body speaks in sensations, the mind speaks in words. So we, are kind of in this position of doing a sort of couples therapy, right? That's how I like to refer to it in my work. So we're doing, we're combining an understanding of how the body works, how the nervous system works, with cognitive behavioral approaches, because the mind loves that. It loves to talk about its own thoughts. But we want to help the mind also start to understand what's going on in the body using the body's language. So the body will take, we start using techniques that help the body to speak and communicate what's going on with it to the mind. So it's like speaking two different languages and getting both your mind and your body on the same page. So I combine it in that way. And but believe it or not, that's somewhat unusual to kind of combine those things. People will say to me, well, how do you combine CBT and somatics? It doesn't really work. And it does. But it's definitely an art and a science. We're kind of melding these two things.
I can attest to that. I have worked with a health coach who was a somatic experiencing, she was certified functional medicine health coach and studying somatic experiencing. And then I started studying somatic experiencing, and I want to say that's what accelerated my healing process. And it's going to be a forever healing process because it's a forever condition. But yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely.
I'm curious. So, applying relationships to this, Jen, let's say someone comes in and says, I have MdDS. My husband doesn't understand me. It's really stressing our marriage. Would you bring him in to a session too and apply CBT and somatic experiencing together as a couple? Would you, how would you work with that in a relationship sort of way?
Well, I tend to think that even couples that want to go into couples therapy should have their own individual therapists. And so I like to, unless a client wants to bring in their partner, their spouse, a family member as a collateral, where we can have like the occasional session where it's learning some of these things, I really focus on working with the client because we've got lots of, really stabilization work. So I should also add that in addition to somatic experiencing, I combine things like polyvagal work, right? And even to some degree, internal family systems. There's a lot to be done there, and it's almost enough to spend our time working on helping the person who is really often the people who are in a state of crisis when they arrive. So we really need to focus on learning about your nervous system, stabilizing your nervous system so that you can then take what you've learned and go and potentially speak to your spouse about it without becoming destabilized. If anyone's going to come into a session, we have to have done quite a bit of foundation laying before they.
That makes a lot of sense. You're right. And it's making the shift in the patient and then allowing them to show up probably more fully or more aware of actually what's all going on inside of them, and being able to communicate that is huge once you apply that to a relationship. So,
if I can take a minute, and I think most people are familiar with the term cognitive behavioral therapy, but there might be people out there listening who don't know what somatic therapy is. Can you describe that a little bit more?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so somatic therapy, the soma is the body. And so it's working with it's working with the nervous system and regulating, bringing in techniques to help regulate the nervous system. So a lot of people think of therapy as just being talk. I'm just going to sit there and talk, and then we're going to talk. But somatic therapy is much less talk. Sometimes it's no talk, and it's just working with what's happening with the body in the moment, inviting the body to tell us what's going on, and then working with the body in that space. Often, many of my clients, especially when they're either in a flare or something else has happened, we will spend a considerable amount of time in a 60-minute session just regulating the nervous system. And it's not about chatting.
Yeah. So I know for me, when I was in a counseling session, and I was describing something that was going on for me, and I knew I was getting tense. And when I get tense, my shoulders do this. And I think my therapist was like, okay, what's your body doing? What's your body telling you? And that was really revealing to me, and dealing with that really helped me to be able to then deal with the things that I was talking about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, because it's a two-way street. And I know probably don't want to take up too much time with this, but if your shoulders are up here, right, and you're sitting there with a therapist who's trained in somatics as well. Now, your mind, at the same time that your shoulders are up here, has a whole lot of stuff going on, right? Your mind is probably telling you lots of things about how uncomfortable you are, how unhappy you are, how things are not going right. And meanwhile, your body's the shoulders are going up, 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 up. If we can invite conversation to the body, because the mind just wants to get in there and do all the talking, like that person at a meeting who just like takes up all the oxygen in the room. We're asking that person to maybe step out for a second, and we're going to work with the body. So if we can get the body into a state of relaxation, the mind has to follow the body. So the body gets to speak first in somatic work versus the mind speaking first. Because the mind has this idea that it is the all-powerful one. And it's like, actually, the body is incredibly powerful. And so there's a dynamic shift and an appreciation and a respect for the whole person, but for the body that is doing so much. Because when chronic illness happens, your mind immediately gets mad at this and just hates the body. And it's like the body is still incredibly powerful, and it's also the vehicle that is transporting you through the whole person, through the world. So we have to learn how to work with it first, which is a bit of a paradigm shift. Anyway.
I wish we could get a show of hands from our audience of how many shoulders went down listening to that. I know mine did.
Happy to lead you in an exercise. Yeah.
Joy, these are some incredible tools that we can learn in therapy. I want to know also if there's anything else that you learned, communication styles, relationship tips, things that helped facilitate your relationships going through this.
So the somatic work that I learned about, started studying, that helped me get to know me. And then that helped me figure out who's healthy for me and maybe who's not healthy for me. There are also there's been a lot of growth and realizing that not everybody will grow. Some people stay stuck or stagnant in their life, and it's black or white. There's no gray. Learning how to identify who those people in my life are, and then how to move forward with keeping them either in my life or maybe distancing myself. I don't know if I'm exactly answering your question.
No, it's actually fabulous. It's
okay.
Really, I love it because it's not what we typically think of.
Yeah.
So,
a lot of it has been around the somatic work that Jen has mentioned and talked about. I'm a newbie, very newbie in that, but it has been so therapeutic for me, and it's helped me significantly. I have done a lot of holistic things, and then applying that to, okay, who's going to be a positive person in my life, and knowing that I need people who challenge me, but not people who maybe degrade me or demean me, but are accepting of me, and vice versa. I need to be accepting of others too. And I want to say that I always have been, but I'm sure that there's been times where I haven't. But that has helped a lot moving forward. Just getting to know the inside me, a lot of internal work, internal soul work, and growth.
Yeah.
Lots of growth, lots of tears.
I love that. And something I think is interesting there that is probably really obvious, but I want to call it out, is that you're talking when Kimberly asked you about tips for dealing with your relationships. You went to what you could do yourself, working on yourself, and how important working on yourself is, and your awareness of and your interactions, what you're doing to interact with your relationships, as opposed to just saying, well, everyone has to change to accommodate me,
Right.
expecting
Yeah.
others to do all the work. I mean, it is a two-way street. Others have a part in a relationship, but we also have a part to play as well there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love that.
Well, and that's more empowering because we can't, they may not. So, but what we can control is how, what we work on within ourselves. And then, like you said, Joy, some will fall away and some will rise to the occasion.
Yep.
Yeah.
Jen, can you share an example of someone that you've helped, that you've worked with, who was really struggling with their relationships? And, was there like this aha moment where things clicked into place, or was it more of, a gradual process?
Yeah, I can. I mean, and with all of these things, it's because relationships are organic. It's always evolving, right? So things clicking into place, they may click into place with some people, and then you'll find that other people, as you're learning and growing, they're learning and growing and changing, we're not always growing and learning together. So, the person that I'm thinking about, and this is actually not just isolated to this person, the pandemic made things worse for a lot of people, and it actually brought a lot of things to a breaking point for a lot of folks in the chronic illness community. But this person is young, they're in their 20s, and they had been living with roommates. And they have been living with themselves, have been living with chronic illness since they were a teenager. And suddenly during the pandemic, their other friends wanted to go out to protests and do all these things that this person could not do because they're immunocompromised and other things going on. And that caused this huge rift that because it was like, well, it's not safe for you all to come home and not, and they're like, well, we've been wearing masks. It's like, it's still not safe. So this person, again, they're only about 25, ended up having to move out, which was devastating. These were some of their closest friends since college, and they ended up having to move out alone in the middle of the pandemic. Did not have now a social support system immediately available to them because of this. And it was really, really hard. And what ended up coming up for them was a tremendous amount of what's called internalized ableism. So when we think of, the term ableism, it's basically judging people based on their ability or their disability, or the presumption that all people can do the same types of activities, with a lot of disregard for people whose disabilities run the gamut. And so internalized ableism is that turned on ourselves. So this person was just like, oh, did I do something wrong? And maybe my illnesses aren't real. They were questioning so much about themselves. And the work that we ended up doing was pretty revelatory because, as it turned out, there was a tremendous amount of old shame that they had carried too, both in their mind and in their body, about their conditions since they had been diagnosed as a teenager. A lot of shame around it. So in working through that and challenging the experience of loneliness, right, which is not just something that we think about and perceive with our mind, but we certainly feel loneliness with our bodies. Mm-hmm. And learning how to experience that without it setting off flares, right? This person has a number of different things, including dysautonomia and vestibular conditions. And the experience of being alone and feeling lonely would often trigger their symptoms. So we really had to do a lot of nervous system work, but we ended up, also processing a lot of their old historic trauma. And they are doing so much better now. And they're living with their partner. And they've also realized, as Joy was saying, there's some people you just don't. You thought that they were along for the ride. You thought that you'd have them in your life forever, but it's actually okay that you don't. And it kind of, it's like, it's sad, and yet we can move forward, and we'll find, and this person is also now finding a whole new community of people living with disabilities, and they feel so much more empowered because they don't have to explain everything. So yeah, that's is one story that stands out.
That's a fabulous story. I'm really happy for her. I don't think there's those happy endings, quote unquote. It's hard to imagine. It probably felt like a death to her, as with many of us, and many other deaths that are accompanying the disorder, where it's like, oh great, now I'm losing my friends too.
Yep.
So yeah. Joy, is there looking back, as this young woman will look back at some point too on her days living with her roommates, is there anything you would have done differently in terms of communicating with your family and friends?
I don't think so. I don't think I had the insight or the capabilities at that time to try to communicate differently. Like, everything just hit so hard, so fast. And like Jen had mentioned earlier, like, I was just in crisis. Yeah. It was crisis mode for quite a while. And when you're in that revved up crisis, what has just happened, and you're watching everything fall away from your life, it's hard to have good coping skills and good communication skills. It's just, I don't think that I would have done anything different. Now, if it were to happen today, then yes, I would handle things differently.
I love that answer. That is, you're absolutely right. I can remember a time when you're so overwhelmed by all the sensations and the symptoms, it's an impossible task to be like, oh gosh, I really should, speak more clearly from my feelings in this moment. It's as if, you're operating like a child, a pre-verbal infant. And I think that's really honest for you to say that, and probably good for the audience to hear too, because then I think they won't walk away from this going, I need to be better, and that's the worst thing we could do for our nervous systems in those moments of crisis. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you both this question. What would you say to someone who's out there who feels like their family and friends will never understand what they're going through? Joy, do you want to start?
Sure. So patience, which anybody going through this journey, at some point they're going to learn patience, but patience is definitely important. Family and friends, some will come around, some may not come around, and that's okay. Everybody is at different stages or places in their life, have different capacities to show empathy or sympathy to one another. I think one of the things that helped me was when I first came across Vita and started reading about similar patients with the same diagnosis as me or similar diagnoses, and that their stories almost fit mine, and realizing, okay, I'm not the only one that's going through this. And all of these people were in different stages too, and seeing that, okay, it is going to get better. It's getting better for this person, but they've been dealing with it for 5-10 years, and I'm in year 1. So patience is a big thing. Working with your nervous system is huge. And once I stumbled across that, everything changed. And and it just made things so much easier. I hope I answered it. I feel like I got a little tangential.
No, I think that's just something that we don't think about in this journey, is working with our nervous system. And also, you mentioned, connecting with Vita and getting validation for how you were feeling. And that again, that's kind of working with your nervous system. It brings your anxiety level down to know that you're not alone in this, that there are other people out there who are part of the larger vestibular community who understand. And for anyone listening, Vita has support groups, support group information on our website if you're looking for peer support. And also, we actually have a page. It's vestibular.org/F as in Frank, S as in Sam, N as in Nancy. That's Family Support Network. That is a page that you can direct your friends and family to, so they can learn about what you're going through and what some of the things. There's like an article on there that a patient wrote that's like, these are the things that I need from you, so that it's, especially if you're in a place where you can't communicate that, sometimes it's helpful to have a resource to hand them and say, here, please read this. So yeah, thank you for that. Jen, how about you? What would you say to people who feel like, oh, my friends and family will never get me?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say, and I've certainly said it before, is that it's not your job to convince people that you're sick. So and that's very hard initially, because it's like, well, I need support. I need these people around me. And yes, we need support, but at the same time, it's just, you don't have to convince anybody of your illness. Now, people, this can get really complicated. But I think, starting there, and as Joy was saying, nervous system work. So connecting with a therapist, connecting with communities that can relate to your illness, start there. So if you have people in your life who are like, I don't understand what the word vestibular is. It's like, well, yeah, this is wonderful. Here's a website. You can go read about it. But beyond that, it isn't your job. Connect with and start finding communities that do understand it. Connect with a therapist, or even group therapy, where you can learn some of these somatic skills, because, our somatic work at its core is about restoring a sense of safety in your body. And when we have had scary things happen, traumatic things happen, our body does not feel safe internally. We just don't feel safe. Even if there's nothing going on around us, we just don't have that sense of what's called felt safety. Somatic work will help to restore that sense of felt safety. And that is going to make it easier to do everything. Because when we come out of a state of fight, flight, or freeze, right, everything starts to function better. We think better, we feel a little bit better, and we can make better decisions. So it's, it is the ultimate in being on the airplane and putting your oxygen mask on first. Mm-hmm. It's like, you got to take care of you first. We can hand off resources. That's great, but that's the least of your worries. Other people are the least of your worries at that, especially initially. So,
this is my favorite episode. This is my absolute favorite episode. It was, I don't know about you, Cynthia, but it was just like, it really took a new path from what the typical, how do we work on our relationships with chronic illness? And I really appreciate the insights that both of you brought. I had to Google it because I know there's 1,000 quotes like that, but I found one that's like, how you love yourself is how you teach others to love you. And this is the foundation of a relationship. So yes, there's lots of tools and there's things we can send them and we can bring them to our doctor's appointments and all those practical things. But you're right. It has to start with working with ourselves and our nervous systems and our sense of safety. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you all.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. And thank you for being part of our vestibular community. Thanks for tuning in to ICU this month.
We hope this conversation sparked new understanding of the vestibular journey, and for all of our patients out there, leaves you feeling just a little more heard and a little more seen. I see you.